Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I am Anwar Chitam, uh, facilitating on behalf of Muslims Connected for an important conversation regarding Palestine. Uh, our topic for tonight, Palestine, building a long-term commitment. We are very pleased to host Sheikh Ebrahim Moosa of Palestine Information Network, who will be giving us a presentation followed by a Q&A, inshallah. Over to you, Ibrahim.
Barakallahu feek, Jazakumullah khairan, Anwar. I just obviously just want to share my screen and we'd begin after that. If you could just advise me once it's up. Do you have it? Are you able to see my screen? All right. Perfect. Jazakallah khairan. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulih al-kareem. Amma ba'd. Respected audience, the organizers, Muslim Connected, and brothers and sisters from throughout South Africa and the world, I thank you for joining this particular scheduled program this evening, which is a indication of our commitment and our connection to Beit al-Maqdis, and the love and the concern that burns within our hearts, inshallah. Even 30 days on into the current assault on the Gaza Strip, as well as 30 days on into this operation called Tufan al-Aqsa, or the storm, the flood of Masjid al-Aqsa. As you could see from the presentation, or the title of the presentation, the idea at this point in time is 30 days on, and the longer this particular assault on the Gaza Strip continues, the human nature, the elements of human nature would tend to draw us towards a position where we perhaps experience some sort of fatigue. Emotions are no longer as spiked as they were before, and therefore this is very critical this evening. How do we build a long-term commitment based on the events that we find unfolding before us? So very quickly, the initiative that I am from is called the Palestine Information Network. It's been around officially since around 2016, 2017. And what is the link to this particular topic this evening? The idea that we had been quite committed to a certain area of a long-term vision, and that is empowerment through education. And there would be people who are involved in lobbying work, political work. There are people involved in the boycott space, people involved in the humanitarian space. But one of the most important factors that we had concentrated on is education, sustained education, structured education regarding the Palestinian plight, as a means to then build up a greater sense of conscientiousness, appreciation, and activism regarding Palestine. One of the key phrases in one of our mission documents was the idea that we need to be proactive rather than reactive, which has been the reaction to Palestine for a long period of time. In terms of the long-term vision, this is the idea that has characterized, or the behavior that has characterized our response to Palestine for a long period of time, which we could call the soda effect. And the soda effect is that when something happens, there is a sudden burst of energy. Everybody would like to boycott. Everybody would like to protest. Everybody would like to do something. But how long can it be sustained? How long can emotional responses be sustained? And this now brings us to practical things that we can do to be able to ensure that our commitment to Palestine is long-term. The most important part of this discussion, as we would start off this evening, is to be able to appreciate history and to be able to appreciate context. Our world today, the media today, tries to limit our or tries to confine our responses. When immediate responses are requested, do you condemn this? Who is right and wrong in one act that occurred on a particular date, stripping it of the long history. And we've emphasized this point. I needed to rephrase this every day. I literally have to rephrase this, but I started off by saying, do not have a memory of 7 days versus do not have a memory span of 7 days, rather have a memory span of 75 years. That was in the initial days, and now it's 30 days on, Allah forbid. So to not have a memory span of 1 month versus a crisis or a tragedy or a Nakba that is continuing for 75 years or even longer. And this is where we start. That as we speak this evening, we are 106 years into the ill effects of the Balfour Declaration, 75 years of Nakba, 56 years of occupation, and 17 years of the siege of Gaza. These are some places where we can start our clock, start counting, looking at the sins or looking at the crimes that have been committed all these years ago and how that impacts on the situation that we face today. Now, the next area that I want to look at, this is not kind of we don't have the luxury this evening in 1 hour to give the full history of Palestine, which is important to talk about it from ancient civilizations, the different groups that inhabited Palestine over the years. But important as just pointers to be able to guide our understanding of how to look at events today. One thing that we need to look at is the founding of the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement founded in the year 1897 in Switzerland, and this man is critical in that process. The agnostic Zionist by the name of Theodor Herzl. And Theodor Herzl, the movement that he creates, let's also appreciate, was a movement that is located within the Jewish community, but it was not popular. It wasn't accepted in its initial days, even by Jews, and it was not motivated at all by anything related to the Muslim community. This was a purely European phenomenon when Zionism was created. It was created as a result of anti-Semitism that Jews faced in Europe. It was also created as a result of the winds or the waves of nationalism that were passing through the world at that particular moment in time. And everybody wanted self-determination. Everybody was looking for a state or some kind of self-autonomy for themselves, and the Zionists were no different. We want a Jewish state as a means of self-identity, but also as a means of escaping European Christian anti-Semitism. The problem with Zionism, obviously, is given many choices that it could for its homeland, it settles on an already occupied area called Palestine. And in Palestine, the racist nature of Zionism becomes manifested as it allies with colonial powers, and it is not there as a guest or for coexistence in Palestine, but wants the whole pie and wants to totally depopulate Palestine from day one. We also, in looking at the wider story, we have to appreciate, and I think this point has become so critical in the wake of the events of October the 7th and the latest assault on Palestinians, how we very often start our timeline to say this is 75 years of Nakba, and we start that timeline on the 14th or the 15th of May 1948. And for many of us, the problem seems to just arise when the State of Israel was created in 1948. If we now see this massive outpouring of the Western world, aircraft carriers that are being sent to the region, and literally the who's who of Western leaders congregating in Israel over the State of Israel over the past month, we then come to appreciate that Zionism is not just a quote-unquote Jewish state or a Zionist project, a Zionist, Jewish Zionist project, but we appreciate that it is a product or it is an edifice, a stepchild of Western civilization. It is a stepchild of European civilization. And we could trace this trend back to Napoleon, who sought to establish a Jewish state in Palestine. We could trace this back to the 1800s when British all kind of European colonialists start setting up their consulates in Jerusalem. And now start meddling in the affairs, the internal affairs of Palestine. And ultimately, if we want to really put our finger on the pulse here, we would have to look at the aftermath of World War One. And according to scholars such as Dr. Khalid Al-Waisi, it is actually, we talk about a period of after World War One when the British took over Palestine from the Ottomans. We talk about that period in traditional terms as a British mandate, whereas in actual fact, this is the moment Palestine was lost. Palestine was lost not only in 1948, it was lost in 1917, and at that particular moment in time, the British occupation begins. And the British, prior to that, obviously issued the Balfour Declaration. There's a long discussion that we could enter into regarding the Balfour Declaration. Suffice to say here, these are two quotes that really aptly cover the significance, the somber significance of the ominous significance of the Balfour Declaration. Arthur Koestler saying, "One nation solemnly promised to a second nation the country of the third." When the British had promised Palestine to the Jews, at that moment the Zionist movement was even a minority within the Jewish world. So they promise it to a minority group at the point when that group does not have any foothold in the land of Palestine, no people, no citizens on the ground, number one. And the British did not control Palestine at the time when the Balfour Declaration was sounded. This happened in November 1917. The British only took over Palestine thereafter. So this is described as the single most destructive political document in the Middle East in the 20th century. And here we also then look after the British when they began the occupation. They suppressed the Palestinians. So many general strikes, so many assaults on the Palestinians in that period. The tactic of demolishing Palestinian homes as a punitive measure for resistance. We see how the Israelis demolish Palestinian homes today. People involved in resistance, people who do not follow certain regulations. This is a product of policies that were put in place by the British. During the period of the British occupation, the Zionists are given the space to develop militias. The Zionists are given the space to develop universities, build on the Hebrew language, and serve in the British Army. So the entire infrastructure of state is created by the British, and therefore, thereafter, they hand it over on a silver platter to the Israelis in 1948. So we see the colonial role that should not be underplayed at this time, that Israel is a Western colonial project. Israel is something that was midwifed by the British, and thereafter the United Nations, and thereafter the United States, supported till this moment in time. And now the support has come out much, much more openly. 1948 is obviously the seminal moment when it comes to events in Palestine. And here, I find this to be, one of the most telling quotes by Tom Segev, where one group of people who are used as cannon fodder. These were the Jewish refugees who had undergone great suffering as a result of the Holocaust. They were firstly, many of them did not want to come to Palestine, but were manipulated by the Zionist movement to come to Palestine, but they were in a desperate state. They come in, and because of Zionist policy, they get everything. And on the other hand, you have the Palestinians who lose everything in an instant. two important things to mention here, which I will link then to the present in just a bit. The important thing to mention here is the precursor to the Nakba, the event that created the state of Israel, was Plan Dalet, or Plan D. This was when Zionist commanders led by David Ben-Gurion came together and they developed a plan to be able to depopulate the center of Palestine. So here they had earmarked the villages that they're going to attack. They then said, when the people are expelled from the villages, how are we going to, we're firstly going to kill as many people as possible. Those that remain are going to become refugees. The homes that remain, we are going to bomb them to the ground. And even the homes, the rubble, we are going to mine the rubble. We are going to put landmines in the rubble to ensure that people do not come back. So this was the plan that was put into place, and thereafter you had the Deir Yassin massacre, which was then a series of massacres that foregrounded the creation of the state of Israel. And the important thing about the Deir Yassin massacre, where more than 250 Palestinians were killed, was the fear element. So after this massacre was committed, the Zionists go with loud hailers to different Palestinian villages and say, if you do not surrender or if you do not leave your land, what happened in Deir Yassin will happen to your villages as well. So this was, a Palestinian nation at that point who was weak, was unprepared. The Zionists at the same time had done extensive intelligence. There's something called the village files, where they had built up profiles of all villages, known where resistance was strong, known which villages were passive, and they developed their strategies accordingly. And in this way, with the element of fear, thousands of Palestinians were driven off their land, not voluntarily. And whoever left, they thought it was just a temporary relocation, only to realize that once they left, they were never ever able to return. So understanding the Nakba is critical to this process. What we emphasize, though, is that the Nakba, yes, it's associated with the events of 1947, 1948, 1949, but it is a process rather than an event. So while we commemorate Nakba Day on the 15th of May every year, it is an ongoing Nakba rather than something that just occurs fleetingly. The next thing is what foregrounded, or what happened before the Nakba was that the Nakba began not only when the British left. So the British left in May 1948, but prior to this, you had the partition plan, where the United Nations says, let us divide Palestine, giving the Jewish people the Jewish residents who were, far less than the Palestinians, giving them 55% of the land, and the Palestinians only 45%, despite the Palestinians owning more land, despite the Palestinians being larger in population. The Zionists accepted the partition plan of 1947 and immediately said that this is the international community giving us a mandate to establish our state. But what is deceptive here is, even if we were to accept that the international community had that right to give the Jews a state, they gave them 55% of Palestine. When the Nakba is finished, when Israel is created, they establish a state on 78% of historic Palestine, showing that they used that as a stepping stone to steal more land. And a lot of the massacres were between November 1947 as well as May 1948. And this is also the birth of the Palestinian refugee crisis, which is the original refugee crisis. We now have crisis in the Ummah in Arakan, crisis in the Ummah in Syria, crisis in the Ummah in Afghanistan in terms of refugees, and many other places. But this was the original refugee crisis that is unresolved. 1967 is the so-called Six-Day War, long history about that, and how the Israelis have obviously tried to create a miracle narrative around 1967, when it was actually much more planned and choreographed on their side. But if the Israelis take control of 78% of Palestine in 1948, this is the state of Israel today, then we have the remaining 22% of Palestine taken control of in 1967. This is where Gaza was taken. This is where East Jerusalem, the eastern part of Jerusalem, which is incorporating the old city and Masjid al-Aqsa, was taken control of in 1967. And this is when the West Bank was taken control of. And this is an important point for us to appreciate, that a lot of the world, because of the United Nations definitions, talks about the occupation. The occupation in the definition of the international community is only speaking about the Israeli control over the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, which is a problematic paradigm, because what about the initial sin, which is the depopulation of Palestine in 1948, how that was stolen, how did the state of Israel, how was it born through terrorism. So, the international community has kind of bought into for a long time the idea of two states. It has bought into the idea that the only oppression that needs to be ended is what's happening in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip in East Jerusalem, and not looking at the entire issue of Palestine as a whole. Now, moving to the present, I'm not going to be talking really much about the conditions in Gaza at this point in time, because that is evident to everybody out there. And my focus this evening is more on a long-term response to what is occurring in Palestine. But I want to then link the past and the present. These the black and white picture is a picture of the refugee camps of the Nakba, Palestinians who were forced into exile in 1948 in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and in the West Bank. How is this relevant to the present? Number one, we have a second wave of a third, fourth, fifth, whatever number it is, wave of Palestinian refugees now internally displaced in the Gaza Strip. This indicates to us that very much present is the idea of the Nakba continuing. Palestinians are still becoming refugees until this point in time, number one. Number two is the majority of residents of the Gaza Strip are refugees, people who were rendered homeless, or their forefathers or their fathers or grandfathers were rendered homeless during the Nakba of 1948. So we have a refugee population who have grown up dispossessed, grown up impoverished, who are now fighting back to be able to claim their land. When the events of October the 7th had occurred, the lands that were taken, the lands that the Mujahideen, the Palestinian resistance, had held on to for a period of time, these were the villages from which the people of Gaza, the residents of Gaza, their forefathers, were expelled from in 1948. So they were actually going back to the lands and the settlements now that were appropriated in 1948. So this is one element of what is occurring. I spoke about the Deir Yassin massacre. The man pictured on the screen, a 95-year-old Israeli criminal by the name of Ezra Yashin. And in the wake of the Israeli assault, or in the wake of the October the 7th, when Israel now mobilizes its army to attack the Gaza Strip, they bring this man out of the woodwork, so to speak. At his old age, is the oldest Israeli reservist, not participating in active combat, but somebody who still considers himself in active duty. And they bring him out. He was part of the Deir Yassin massacre in 1948, in April 1948, on the 9th of April 1948, where all these atrocities were committed, which was essential for the creation of the State of Israel. And he comes out addressing Israeli soldiers to encourage them, to motivate them. And Ezra Yashin says to Israeli soldiers, be triumphant and finish them off. Don't leave anyone behind. Erase them, their families, their mothers, and their children. These are animals who no longer deserve to live. So direct inspiration is being drawn from the events of 1948 until now. We appreciate that the Israelis have the central goal of the Israeli state has always been maximum Palestinian geography with minimum Palestinian demography. Maximum Palestinian geography, land, with minimum Palestinian demography, Palestinians present on the land. And despite the process where they've tried initially to purchase the land, then they brought settlers, then they've got their state, then they've got their occupation, Israel has still not managed in its goal of ethnically cleansing Palestinians completely. And therefore, they've always had this idea of completing the job that was started in 1948. And therefore, they've always articulated the idea that the Palestinians of Gaza need to be pushed into the Sinai in Egypt, and the Palestinians of the West Bank need to be pushed into Jordan. This is a long expressed idea in Zionist circles. And in the wake of October the 7th, they've gone full scale ahead with plans to completely push the population of Gaza. So this is different. This is what's different about the current assault, whereby the Israelis are not just looking at mowing the lawn, so to speak, as they did before, killing Palestinians, trying to suppress them for a short while, and then thereafter allowing some reconstruction, and then repeating this process time and time again. Now the idea, as has been exposed through a number of diplomatic leaks, was let us push the entire population of Gaza, or significant amount of the population of Gaza, into Egypt. Egypt should be pressurized to accept these refugees. We're going to offer bribes to the Egyptian government to accept the Palestinians of Gaza, write off your debt. Then a demilitarized zone will be created between Gaza and Egypt. Thereafter, the Palestinians will be put up in tents deeper in the Sinai. And the long-term plan was to actually settle them completely, build residential blocks in Sinai to accept the Palestinian refugees. So the point is, the history is important for context, and the history is a lived history, as the Israelis now obviously continue to try and repeat the actions of the Nakba and complete the job, as in their minds that was started in 1917 or 1948, etc. Here is obviously the picture of the map of Palestine. As you could see, the West Bank, Jerusalem, and Gaza, and the entire area in blue. We do not cut that out of the discussion. This is officially the state of Israel, but we still question, how was the state of Israel created? Was it created on legitimate grounds? And within this area, there are more than 2 million Palestinians who are residents of the state of Israel, but are Palestinian and are treated as second-class citizens. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind that while events are playing out in the West Bank, or rather playing out in Gaza, we also have a series of crimes in the West Bank and attempts to depopulate the West Bank of Palestinians. We have serious assaults on Jerusalem and Masjid al-Aqsa, which is basically the essence of this particular fight. And then also appreciate, when it comes to Gaza, sometimes people make the mistake of talking of Gaza as a synonym for Palestine. No, Gaza is a very small area of Palestine. It is just 41 kilometers in length. And the Gaza Strip also, we appreciate that the Gaza Strip is, as I said, a small area of Palestine, and it is just one arena of the struggle that is itself playing it out. Let's now go on to a few pointed questions, as I mentioned, as was mentioned in the description. People are asking these kind of questions. You might have other questions. If we have a chance, we try to explore some of those. But the question first that we look at what happened on October the 7th. So I think we've given sufficient context to say October the 7th did not happen out of the blue. October the 7th happened after a long process of Israeli crimes, starting from 1917, 1948, all the massacres. Then, before I can even talk about October the 7th, let's talk about the fact that Gaza was under siege, that the people of Gaza had elected Hamas in a democratic election that was deemed free and fair even by the world. And just because they had selected a movement that was not acceptable to the Western world, a siege was imposed on the Gaza Strip. Nothing was, very little was allowed in and out, and the siege was extremely strict in those early, 5 years since 2007 to 2012-13. Then, in the state of siege, Gaza was attacked 4 times prior to what occurred this year. Wars in 2008, 2009, 2012, 2014, and 2021. In this time, the United Nations says by 2020, Gaza is unlivable, unfit for human habitation. In this period as well, since Israel came into being, you have attacks on Masjid al-Aqsa, you have the arson attack on Masjid al-Aqsa, you have the Intifada that breaks out in 2000, you have escalating Zionist attacks, changing the status quo of Masjid al-Aqsa as a Muslim-only place of worship. You have the attacks on worshippers, the pictures are all in our minds, the attacks on worshippers in Ramadan, and you have the most right-wing Israeli government coming into being in 1948. Rather, the most right-wing Israeli government coming into being in the past 2 years. So with this escalation of crimes, Palestinian resistance said that they believed that Israel was planning something big, a war of extermination against the Palestinians, as well as going closer to commit a major crime at Masjid al-Aqsa based on their intelligence. And they believed that animal sacrifice, Zionists were going to conduct animal sacrifice at Masjid al-Aqsa. Together with that, they felt that the number of Palestinian prisoners was excessively high. They were also frustrated that after 18 years, the situation in the Gaza Strip was extremely bleak. On the back of all of this, they launched this attack, taking Israel by surprise on a day of holiday. What happened on that day? They bombed first, perhaps a cyber attack against Israeli military communication, taking out communications, then bombing Israeli observation towers, then taking out Israeli bases near Gaza with armed drones, firing a barrage of rockets into the Israeli state to be able to confuse the Israelis. So under the cover of thousands of rockets, they now embark on this attack from land, from sea, as well as breaking down the fence that separates Gaza from the rest of historic Palestine. And they end up going well beyond the expectations in terms of the amount of Israelis, soldiers that are able to take hostage, and the areas and the bases that they are able to attack. They were astounded even by their own success. And as as we understand, we will never forget the significance of this particular attack, unprecedented in 75 years. And it is a testimony of the fact that Palestinians never ever forgot their cause. Palestinians remained steadfast in the path of resistance. 20 settlements that were attacked, 11 military sites, the highest Israeli toll since the creation of the state, one of the highest Israeli tolls. It's a blow to the normalization deals that were occurring with the Arab regimes. The largest number of Israeli prisoners, which give the Palestinians a great number, a great bargaining chip. And it shows that the Palestinians, the Israelis, were unable to suppress the Palestinians. They always said that the old will die and the young will forget. And the fact that refugees, many decades down the line, were able to fight back so valiantly for their land, would would be able to show that the Israeli project or the Israeli assumptions of the Palestinians had failed. We then move on to a next question here. So the significance of the events of October the 7th should not be underestimated, and we should also ensure that while what the Israelis are doing now, it's horrendous. War crimes, genocide is occurring on the Gaza Strip, but this is a means to repair Israeli injured pride. What the Israelis are doing is, kind of just doing rash decisions. Benjamin Netanyahu is fighting for his political future. He's questionable for how these lapses had occurred on October the 7th, and therefore he's just bombing, creating mass destruction to be able to appease the Israeli public. But deep down, there's an economic crisis in Israel. There's a military crisis in Israel. There is, so many internal refugees or displaced persons in the state of Israel, and despite bombing for so many days, the resistance still remains on its feet. The next question that people have been asking a lot is, who is Hamas? And premised in this particular discussion is the fact that some people have alleged, which really doesn't have much basis to it. People have alleged that Hamas is a creation of Israel. Hamas is a creation of the United States of America. Basically, Hamas is, we need to start off by saying, is this even the most relevant question? Is it relevant to focus so much on Hamas? And why I'm saying this is the Palestinian issue is an issue of Palestine as a whole. It is an issue of the Palestinian people as a whole. It is an issue of the Ummah as a whole. And therefore, it's an Israeli tactic to be able to, collapse this conflict and suggest it is only a conflict between Hamas and Israel, whereas this is actually a battle for the entire Palestine. It's a battle of Palestinians against the Israeli occupation. It's a battle of the entire Ummah for Beit al-Maqdis against the Zionist occupation. So that qualification in place. Secondly, Hamas, if we go now into the actual origins of Hamas, Hamas is a movement that was born out of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and Egypt is literally next to Gaza. So it was born out from the Muslim Brotherhood, and its founder is the late Sheikh Ahmed Yassin al-Shaheed. As you see there, the wheelchair-bound Sheikh Ahmed Yassin. And his vision was that Palestinians need to develop their capacity holistically, that this is not only an armed struggle against Israel, it is a cultural struggle, it is a political struggle, it is an educational struggle, it is an Islamic struggle. And as a result of that, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin goes ahead and founds Hamas before military features. Military attacks on the Israeli state features and resistance features. They build up, as you could see, the Islamic University of Gaza, so many masjids in Gaza, so many schools in Gaza, so many educational institutions and charitable institutions in Gaza. And even when Hamas was not in control, this created great popularity amongst the people because they were a state out of the state. They were providing services to the general population. Premised in all of this was Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, saying that this needs to be an Islamic struggle. And to that end, Sheikh Ahmed Yassin himself is imprisoned in Israeli jails. He memorizes the Quran in 4 months while he is in an Israeli jail. He reads 4 ajza of the Quran daily while he is in prison. So this is the caliber that of the founders of Hamas. The movement then develops into political wings, social wings, Islamic wings, as well as resistance wings. The movement, produces many martyrs, many political prisoners, comes into a government of Palestinians in 2006, and obviously has been in control of Gaza right until this particular moment in time. So it's quite clear that this is a movement that's deeply rooted in Palestinian society, number one. And let us know that we cannot also make a distinction, as the Israelis would like us to make, that these are the civilians and these are Hamas. Hamas is providing, is the government of Gaza. Hamas is the protection force of Gaza, one of the protection forces of Gaza. The women and children of Gaza are siblings, fathers, brothers, sisters of the fighters in Gaza. So the idea that Hamas is on the one side and the Palestinian population is something else is also a fallacy that needs to be confronted. I see a question there from an anonymous attendee saying that is it true that the Hamas manifesto includes wanting to wipe out all Jews? This is something that is always brought up. So there's a historical Hamas manifesto that is a product of the politics of the time, when that manifesto was created. But that document has now been updated in terms of what is now called the Hamas political platform that was published a few years ago. And I want to read from what this Hamas document says to be able to also, remove from our minds some of the misconceptions related to this movement. It says, by virtue of its justly balanced middle way and moderate spirit, Islam for Hamas provides a comprehensive way of life and an order that is fit for purpose at all times and in all places. Islam is a religion of peace and tolerance. It provides an umbrella for the followers of other creeds and religions who can practice their beliefs in security and safety. Hamas also believes that Palestine has always been and will always be a model of coexistence, tolerance, and civilizational innovation. Hamas affirms, and this is a critical part, Hamas affirms that its conflict is with the Zionist project, not with the Jews, because of their religion. Hamas does not wage a struggle against the Jews because they are Jewish, but wages a struggle against the Zionists who occupy Palestine. Yet, it is the Zionists who constantly identify Judaism and the Jews with their own colonial project and illegal entity. And I think that that is clear-cut enough to be able to expound where Hamas really stands on the position of Jews and is not just out for a blanket, bloodthirsty extermination of Jews. Next question we've got a lot in some circles is, did Israel attack itself? And premised in this question, firstly, is perhaps I would argue a sense of mental slavery. And the Israelis have occupied the land, we know, but maybe they've also occupied our minds. And this is the product not only of Israeli occupation, but this is the product of years of colonialism, where Muslims have always been victims. Muslims have always been oppressed. And we've come to a state where we kind of have accepted our status of victimhood, think that Muslims always must be on the receiving end. Muslims do not have agency. Muslims are not able to, or our oppressed are not able to innovate, develop in resistance techniques, develop economically, develop militarily. So when we look at conspiracy theories, we need to understand perhaps it is a result of mental slavery, number one. Number two, we also are believers. And looking at anything, we need to keep in mind the fact that it's always the system of Allah that, right will triumph over might, no matter how mighty that might may be. And in this land of Palestine, we had a very seminal battle that occurred, as mentioned in the Quran, and that was where the words were uttered, كَم مِّن فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ غَلَبَتْ فِئَةً كَثِيرَةً بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. How many a time have a small group overcome or triumphed over a large group by the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So we look at it in that sense. Secondly, we appreciate that we might have an exaggerated idea of the strength of Israel. Also, the Israeli state was in a state of decline, internal divisions, massive protests, so many elections in a period of time. Ehud Barak, former Israeli prime minister, in the last 2 years, had asked the question, we are facing an existential battle as Israel. will Israel survive its 80th year? Will it survive 8 decades? They were asking these type of questions. So we perceive an all powerful Israel, whereas there were existing cracks. Secondly, the Israeli regime, dominated by settlers, had focused a lot on the West Bank. So they had moved a lot of soldiers to the West Bank to protect settlers in the West Bank and focus on annexation of the West Bank. This meant that there were a minimal amount of soldiers close to Gaza, and they relied on technological means, automatic guns, on surveillance to be able to police the Gaza Strip, and not so much on personnel. So that's a logical reason why Palestinians were able to achieve such success. And with disabling the Zionist or the Israeli communication systems and cyber warfare, this would have created mass confusion within the few Israeli soldiers that were at that particular point in time. So did Israel attack itself? Was this one huge conspiracy? No. The Mujahideen, the Palestinians, the Palestinian resistance have prepared for this. And obviously they had limited goals, but what happened on that particular day, they were surprised by the results that they had achieved. People have asked the question as well, why did Hamas awaken a sleeping dog? You know that if you are going to attack the Israelis, are they not going to come back with a vengeance? This description itself is problematic. Israel, the state of Israel, was not a sleeping dog. The state of Israel was a vicious dog, whether it was bombing or whether it was suppressing Palestinians through the crime of apartheid. No day that Palestinians live is without violence, whether the world sees it or not. So Israel has never needed an excuse to attack the Palestinians. Israel has attacked the Palestinians preemptively, and whatever Palestinians have done is always a reaction to the original Israeli crimes, and it's not something new that the Palestinians have initiated. Two other points is if this is blamed that Hamas is responsible for the atrocities that are now committed on the Palestinian people, there were thousands of atrocities, many massacres that were committed before Hamas was even created. Who do we blame then? The very creation of the State of Israel and all the massacres, Hamas only came into existence in 1987. Secondly, Hamas supposedly attacked from the Gaza Strip. Why then is Israel attacking the West Bank and other areas of Palestine where nobody mounted such a huge attack on the Israeli state? And then lastly, on this particular point, the allegation that Israel has killed its own people, this is true, but not in the sense of a conspiracy. When there was a frenzy and when there was total confusion within Israeli lines because of the resistance attack, the Israelis had went absolutely crazy, just firing at random, where anything that was perceived to be a threat, any car that is moving, any building where there are fighters inside, just blowing up the entire building. In the process, they killed Israelis as well. And there is an Israeli directive that if there is a risk of Israelis being taken captive, then we can kill our own people rather than them being taken captive. So yes, Israelis did kill some of their own people, a certain amount, but this was not, a means to just kill them for the sake of killing them. It was killing in the frenzy of the moment. The next question that we have here is the question of were crimes committed against Israeli civilians? So the idea of women being raped, the idea of elderly being taken captive, the idea of babies being beheaded. Here we must appreciate one part of this narrative is they've tried to say Hamas is ISIS. Hamas has fought against ISIS type ideology in the Gaza Strip. So Hamas has no link ideologically with ISIS. So that is not founded whatsoever. Secondly, the story that 40 Israeli children were beheaded in a community near Gaza. The story was traced back to only one single source, which was a settler leader by the name of Major David Ben Zion. And investigating it. It was totally debunked. It came from the single source, and even the Israeli army thereafter backtracked. But the damage was done when this story was then spread all over the world. And this is the Israeli playbook. They make up a lie, then there's no evidence for it. Western journalists spread it like wildfire. Diplomats and politicians parrot it loudly. A narrative is built, and the general public believes it. The damage is done, and then they finally admit that it never happened. So this has been debunked. The idea that Palestinians bombed their own hospitals has been debunked. And to add to the sense of Israeli lies, the elderly Israeli woman Yocheved Lefshitz, she spoke quite candidly about the good treatment that she had received at the hands of ISIL, at the hands of Hamas, and this obviously caused the Israeli propaganda narrative to fall flat. So yes, there is a possibility that some excesses have been committed against Israeli civilians when the Palestinian fighters went in, but Hamas had clearly given its members a directive: do not attack women and children. And some of the excesses happened when that fence fell down, and ordinary Palestinians in the heat of the moment rushed in, and there was those moments of mayhem where people did things, took hostages that they were not supposed to have taken hostage, a small amount of them. So the discipline that accompanied the initial Palestinian attack fell away, where the targets were purely military. Thereafter, when individuals went on their own from the Gaza Strip, there was a bit of mayhem that's responsible for what we're seeing right now. We're coming towards the end, and this is where I talk about the important responses that are required from us. Before we can talk about the responses, I just want to see if there's some questions here with obviously the request is, if anybody has questions, to post them now, so we'd be in a position to try and run through as many of them towards the end. Type it in the chat or the Q&A box. So in terms of our responses, two things here that I am two ideas that I'm throwing out, which we can engage on. The first idea is the idea of a perfectionist fallacy. And there's this picture of all the starfish that have beached on the shore. And a story in management circles goes that all these starfish were beached, and obviously if they stay longer in the sun, they're going to die. So one of the Samaritans, one of the good people, decided, let me assist these fish that have beached and throw them back into the ocean. And one by one he throws them, but there are thousands, so it's impossible for him to really assist all of them. So he throws one by one, and an onlooker comes and says, are you really going to make a difference here? There are thousands, and you throwing one by one, and you're definitely not going to finish the job. And the person replies that for those that I've thrown in, have I not protected their lives? Have I not saved their lives? Have I not made a difference to them? And this is a fallacy that we fall in, that the onlooker had fallen into, whereby if we cannot solve a problem fully, sometimes we do not do anything towards that problem and say that we don't need to do anything. Part of the perfectionist fallacy is a kind of passing on the buck. So we would focus on, saying that the Arab leaders are not doing anything. When are they going to do something? When are they going to send the armies? When are they going to open the borders? Those are legitimate sentiments, but it's a kind of way of removing our own personal responsibility for a situation. Allah is not necessarily going to ask me and you, did we send an army? Did we, in the broad sense, liberate Palestine? It never happens like that one individual, produces all the change. But Allah is going to ask me the small actions that I and you could do within our normal lives. Did we do those small things, whether it's dua, whether it's boycotting, whether it's lobbying, whether it's posting, as we'll coming to discuss? Did we do those actions rather than awaiting some knight in shining armor. So the one thing I wanted to mention here is avoid the perfectionist fallacy. Do what you can, and we are responsible for what we can do. لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. The second idea is, as time goes on, yes, we are keen to follow the news, but I find it to be a shortcoming on our part, and I came to know this, learn this term recently, doom scrolling. If you can see there, the practice of obsessively checking online news for updates, especially on social media feeds, with the expectation that the news will be bad, such that a feeling of dread from this negative expectation fuels a compulsion to continue looking for updates in a self-perpetuating cycle. We are spending a lot of time monitoring developments on social media. I appreciate that there is a media battle to be fought. Whatever is being posted is valuable in deconstructing the Israeli narrative. That is why social media is taking down Palestinian posts and Palestinian hashtags. We agree with that, and that battle needs to continue. Nobody is saying become a primitive person and cut away from social media completely. But is our obsession with social media making us numb, creating a sense of despondency, mental problems, and is it preventing us from much more productive action relating to Palestine? I understand that the very nature of social media, as many documentaries and research have pointed out, is to make people lazy, to make people disengaged. So we might feel that we are engaged to a particular issue, but we are spending excessive amounts of time whereby that could actually be spent in more productive time. So I am suggesting keep up to date, spend a certain point of time in the day looking at developments in Palestine, getting the accurate picture, reading analysis, etc., sharing what is beneficial. But after that, focus on summaries rather than minute-to-minute updates, and then diversify our efforts to other areas that require action. Something else that we need to avoid here is we focus a lot on Gaza as a charity case, but charity is one foot. The other foot that needs to walk forward is justice. And I've given this example a lot recently, where if a person is being beaten, somebody is being unfairly beaten, and the person, the victim, every now and then we give him an apple, we give him some water, he will find some temporary relief. But is the beating going to stop? And this has been our approach for a long time, looking at Palestine purely as an issue of a humanitarian issue when it is an issue of justice. And instead of only focusing on the food, we need to focus on cutting off the source of the oppression and stopping the beating rather than a band-aid solution to this particular crisis. So in terms of the actions that I'm suggesting here, the first action that I'm suggesting is humanize. And those bodies that are being blown to smithereens, those children that are being killed, look at it through the lens of ukhuwah. إنما المؤمنون إخوة المسلم أخو المسلم. Those body parts are my body parts. Those children are my children. And if excessive exposure, yes, we need to see a bit of this to understand the gravity, and the world needs to see this as well. But if excessive exposure is making us numb, let's cut back on that. But see these as our brothers, make the brotherhood connection, and also humanize, say the people's names, do not concentrate on numbers, rather concentrate on the human beings behind it, their personal stories. The core of this battle, and we don't have enough time to talk about this, is Masjid al-Aqsa. And the strategy that was used in the past, in the time of Salahuddin, prior to embarking on many other modes of resistance, they sat in gatherings of Fada'il Bayt al-Maqdis. They sat in gatherings to be able to learn the virtues of Masjid al-Aqsa. What does the Quran say? How many verses in the Quran, the stories of the prophets in Palestine, the ahadith that expound on the virtues of Bayt al-Maqdis? And I would say, as a long-term strategy, it is important, before our entry point is just politics and the massacres. Our entry point to this discussion should be a deep-seated love for Masjid al-Aqsa and a deep-seated understanding of the centrality of Palestine in Islam, when we appreciate that, we would be compelled out of a position of love and concern to exert ourselves for this particular cause. As many of our scholars have been mentioned, this is a time to return to Allah. In this particular moment, Palestine out of the picture, when we see such huge amounts of human killing, when we see armies gathering, it should create within us this urgency that the world is undergoing drastic change. We are possibly coming closer to the days of Qiyamah and the mega events prior to Qiyamah. And this should create an urgency for personal reformation within ourselves. Next is dua. And there is a fallacy that I take issue with the words that are often used. The least we can do is dua. The least we can do is dua. This is a trivialization of the role that dua actually plays and the power that dua is actually holds. Dua was an inseparable part of the strategy of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Sahaba, and the great leaders of the Ummah. At the same time, it was most effective only because it was coupled with physical action, deep planning, and much sacrifice. The example of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is that dua is the first recourse before anything else and the last action after everything else. So I think this idea sometimes is saying, do everything and then make dua. No, dua is essential throughout the entire process. And also, dua is not meant to replace hard work, planning, and sacrifice. Dua is a spiritual booster that brings fruition and results to the efforts we make in life. We learn from the Anbiya how dua was coupled with extensive effort. At Badr, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after taking all the military decisions and precautions needed to secure victory over Quraysh, he then embarked on dua. Making dua and hoping for miracles without taking the necessary effort is an approach that runs contrary to the spirit of dua. And just keep this in mind, in our approach to dua, we should be like a farmer who plows the earth, plants the seed, waters it, and also makes dua for good rain and weather and an excellent harvest. Next action item is in terms of the Quran. We take physical, Imam Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah commenting on وَقَالَ الرَّسُولُ يَا رَبِّي إِنَّ قَوْمِ اتَّخَذُوا هَذَا الْقُرْآنَ مَحْجُورًا, that this ummah has abandoned the Quran. He says one way that we've abandoned the Quran is we do not use the Quran as shifa. So at this moment there are so many verses in the Quran that give us solace and give us guidance in moments of turmoil, number one. And also وَجَعَلْنَا مِنْ بَيْنِ أَيْدِيهِمْ سَدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ سَدًّا. The Quran is healing, it is guidance, and it is a weapon. Let us read the Quran for assistance for the believers. Then, as this whole presentation is about, it's about learning. We have to learn the subject holistically, the injustices in Palestine, the Zionist arguments, the Islamic arguments, and this is the bedrock of our other responses. We cannot run an emotional battle without a bedrock of education. And here we also need to look at how change happened before. And I want to highlight this very briefly, whereby in the time of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, excellent example to show how we think victory will only come through some huge military advance, whereas it is a combination of many things. It's a combination of the upbringing of Salahuddin, the intention of his mother, the priority that was given to Sunnah. Nuruddin Zanki, the person who preceded Salahuddin, he was known as Dhul Jihadain, one who prioritized the battle against the enemy in the battlefield, but also the battle against the base carnal desires. They also always sought victory from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Salahuddin loved the ahadith. He built so many madaris. He was accessible. He promoted the practice of tasawwuf and gaining closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He had excellent character. He purified the beliefs of the Muslims from the Fatimid Shia at that particular time. He had ulama who were, his advisors. Then, together with the spirituality, he prioritized manufacturing, agriculture, improving his army, communication through carrier pigeons, etc. So we can see our idea of a quick solution versus all the different elements that come towards victory. After learning whatever we learn, we should share to obviously break misconceptions and make the information accessible to people who do not have access. Protest. قالوا معذرة إلى ربكم. Let us protest with the intention that من رأى منكم منكرا فليغير بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه. If we cannot solve a particular injustice physically, then we speak out against it. Then we obviously need to boycott, targeted boycotts as a means from an Islamic perspective, either ethically or strategically, but as a means of a financial struggle against the oppressors. We are not complicit in the oppression by assisting entities that oppress the Palestinians. Organizing is very important. The fact that people have been able to organize huge marches, the historical marches in the United Kingdom, in Britain over the past days, is something that did not come out of thin air. Over a long period of time, local branches of organizations were set up. Capacity was built, skills were built, and then when a crisis comes, people are able to mobilize. We need to be able to not just be active on social media, but translate our momentum on social media onto the ground. Lifestyle audit at this particular moment is very, very important. And I'll give the example of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anh, where Umar radiallahu anh, in a time of crisis for the Muslims, when there was a drought in Medina al-Munawwara, he cut back. He cut back from eating butter, which he loved to take with his meals. And he said that I will not eat this luxury, as he considered it, because I will only go back to my former eating habits once the overall condition of the Muslims has improved. And at this moment, the optics are very important. While people are starving in Gaza, if we are pursuing a path of extravagance and luxury, this is not showing solidarity with the Muslims and concern for their affairs. Charity, there are means to get charity into the Gaza Strip through people who've been working there for a long period of time. That needs to continue. We also, as I said earlier, charity with pursuit of justice. Assist people on the ground, assist causes that are fighting the root of injustice, who are involved in resistance as well, and understand that the requirement for charity, as we can see, the scale of destruction in the Gaza Strip, the requirement of charity is not just for today or when the ceasefire happens, if it happens, but this is for the long term. This is something the needs in the Gaza Strip are immense for the foreseeable future, and therefore pursue kind of strategies where we allot, perhaps take out debit orders to be able to assist Palestinians in the long term. These are all long-term strategies, not something that's going to produce results immediately, but it shows a long-term commitment, and it's not business as usual, whereby when the bombs are falling, we are active and we go quiet. All of these things can be done regardless of whether the bombs are falling or not. And then embrace the future. Understand that it's no longer going to be business as normal when it comes to Palestine. The Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip, they've used violence before, they've bombed homes before, they've killed families before. So this is not new for the people of Palestine. And therefore, the Palestinians at this moment in time say that we do not intend after this war to remain a population of oppressed refugees and prisoners and denied access to the land, that is, and denied access to the land. So after this, the Palestinians are not looking to go back to the old style of doing things and the old rhetoric for Palestine. They are going forward and looking forward to a liberated Palestine, and they are not going to compromise. They've lost so much, so they want to gain everything. and they say that there has to be a huge price that Israel has to pay in terms of giving Palestinians their rights back, or Palestinians gaining their rights back after this particular assault. So understand that the demands of the future are great. And also when it comes to our deen, as I've mentioned here, embrace our future. The Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah said that the initial events in the story of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam happened in Makkah al-Mukarramah. But the full glory of Islam towards the end of time with major events is going to happen. It's going to shift to another arena, and that is the arena of Bayt al-Maqdis. In conclusion, just a few posts here. This caught my eye yesterday, where a Jordanian DJ quits the music industry for the sake of Allah, His Messenger, and the solidarity with the martyrs of Gaza. He says, "I announced my retirement from the profession of DJ for the sake of Allah, in support of the religion of Allah and our noble Prophet, and in solidarity with the martyrs of Gaza." This is what I'm talking about: lifestyle changes and being sensitive to the needs of the moment. Then when it comes to boycott here, you get long lists of boycott, which I do not necessarily advocate for. We must be aware of the broad amount of Zionist products, but more effective is choosing 2 or 3 brands and the entire community mobilizing behind it to be able to create maximum effect, rather than scattered efforts, which will be rewarded by Allah, no doubt. But in terms of the strategy, a small number is much more feasible for maximum impact. In terms of news and information, while things are happening in Gaza, always keep an eye on Masjid al-Aqsa. We've got a specific BC list, for example, from our side, in addition to so many great platforms out there. Stay connected, and there's a WhatsApp channel as well. The numbers are there. This is a book that I had authored that could be helpful in the process. The full story of Masjid al-Aqsa, starting at the second masjid on earth, right till Mahshar al-Manshar, the place where people will gather from Qiyamah. This could be a valuable resource to build that love for Masjid al-Aqsa. Also highly recommended the books of Ismail Adam Patel, Medina to Jerusalem, Virtues of Jerusalem, Palestine, A Beginner's Guide, 40 Ahadith on Masjid al-Aqsa, and an excellent series for kids, amongst other series that Friends of Al-Aqsa has produced, which is Palestine for Kids. These are the two products that we are advocating boycott from our side. In terms of targeted boycott, KUA for its owners, unashamed support for the state of Israel, and Clover, which is a wholly owned Israeli company that is based in Tel Aviv. Lastly, I want to come to this particular point, that Gaza is going to be victorious in this particular battle. Even if theoretically the resistance is bombed to the ground, how can victory ever be achieved on the corpses of so many innocent people? Those young children who grow up are going to be growing up in a world whereby they would always remember the atrocities that were committed against them, and there's no way that victory can be achieved by such atrocities against a civilian population. It reminds me of this picture I took while I was in the Gaza Strip, which was titled or was subtitled "Rubble to Riches." And in the wake of a previous assault on the Gaza Strip, when there was rubble all around and the Israelis didn't allow construction materials into the Gaza Strip, Gazan engineers developed an innovative method whereby they took the rubble, crushed it back to powder, and then redeveloped it as concrete. And with this, they were able to redevelop and rebuild so many areas of Gaza in a atmosphere of siege. And this shows us the triumphant and innovative spirit of the Palestinians, who will never ever be defeated. As the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, لا تزال طائفة من أمتي على الدين ظاهرين لعدوهم قاهرين لا يضرهم من خالفهم إلا ما أصابهم من لأواء حتى يأتي أمر الله وهم كذلك. قالوا وأين هم يا رسول الله قال في بيت المقدس وأكنا في بيت المقدس. That there is a group of my ummah who will always remain steadfast on the truth, firm against the enemy, the betrayal, whichever betrayal we see, whether it's from our own side, people around them, that will not be able to affect them until the time of Qiyamah. Who are these people? Where are these people, O Messenger of Allah? They are in Palestine, they are in Bayt al-Maqdis and the surroundings of Bayt al-Maqdis. So we draw hope from that. We draw hope that the martyrs are in heaven. We draw hope that miracles are being seen in terms of the aroma that is coming out from the bodies of the shuhada. Many other signs that are coming out from the Gaza Strip. Like we take solace from the example of the Sahabi who said, Fustu wa Rabbil Kaaba. When he was being martyred, I am successful by the Rabb of the Kaaba. So indeed, the people of Gaza are successful in this moment, while the Israelis are really struggling in this particular battle. And at the end of the day, we remind ourselves that victory is definitely coming. Ala inna nasrallahi qareeb. It is certainly victorious and triumphant people of the Gaza Strip. The only cause then is responsibility. As they are triumphant, as they will succeed, as they will overcome, will we at this particular moment, will history record us as people who were silent spectators to what had occurred, or were we people who contributed to victory, liberation, as well as standing up for the oppressed at a very critical moment in the history of the Ummah, history of the world? Jazakumullah khairan for your concern and your listening, inshallah. And Anwar, you could advise further, inshallah.
شكرا جزيلا سيدي إبراهيم موسى for that very comprehensive overview, taking us from the early historic days of this entire colonization in of Palestine to the current conflict that we are seeing taking place against the people of Palestine itself. There are some questions, and these are quite pertinent questions that should be answered. So I'll start off one by one, and you can engage on it, inshallah. The first question is, if Israel is on the decline, then why are Arab countries still interested in normalization with Israel?
So I think the fortunes of both of these entities are tied to each other. So there's a piece by Azam Tamimi, for example, a while back, where he argues that will Arab liberation be required before the liberation of Palestine? And historically speaking, this has always been a critical issue that the surrounding areas need to be become free, tyranny needs to be removed in the areas surrounding Palestine prior to Palestine even actually being liberated. And I think what is at play here is that just as Israel was a creation of the Western powers in the wake of World War I, or it was nurtured through that period, very much so you have regimes in all of these areas, whether the Jordanians, which is a product of the Arab revolt and Sharif Hussein, whether it is the Saud regime, whether it is the Egyptian regime that is supported to the tune of millions in foreign aid, just as Israel gets so much foreign aid, Jordan and Egypt, by virtue of entering into peace treaties with the Israelis, similarly get huge amounts of aid. So I think we see it in that particular way. It's not a case of strength or weakness, but it's a case of these are all products that emanate from the same root, and therefore that's why one would see that they seek to. It's an alliance of oppressors, alliance of oligarchs, and alliance of surveillance states that operate together, and at the same time, then they would be united against a common enemy. That's why you'd see Egypt suppressing the Muslim Brotherhood, and then using the same rhetoric to say that Hamas is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, and therefore we even shut down Hamas offices in many of the Arab states. So I think if we see it in that regard, it is more a case of this is a logical alliance between people for survival and based on mutual goals.
Shukran for that, for answering that very comprehensively. There is a question with regards to boycotts. We spoke about targeted boycotting as opposed to sporadically trying to boycott everything, which oftentimes does not necessarily translate into making any dent onto the bottom line of any company. So, what would you suggest that we boycott? Because we have a question: how do we know which places and products to boycott? Because all of a sudden now, McDonald's are saying they are not affiliated with Israel. This is just one example.
So, for example, if McDonald's are saying that they are not affiliated with the state of Israel, and it is matched with actions that show a desire to dissociate itself from the state of Israel, for example, if that is becomes the case, that is a product of a boycott done correctly. That the end result of a boycott is to be able to, number one, in cases where there's companies that are directly linked with the occupation and they are inextricable from the occupation, to cut their financial power that is translated into massacres and weapons. But for companies on the outside who are not directly tied with the Israeli occupation, it's to put pressure on them to say that we might even do better business with you if you take an ethical stance, and that is more of a strategic boycott. So I understand the difference between an ethical boycott, which is products that we personally would not participate in because of their stance, and products that strategically are products that generally are not necessarily so tied up with the ideology of occupation. They are assisting the occupation indirectly by putting pressure on them. That financial support is cut, and it then puts off creates momentum for the Palestinian cause, and becomes an incentive for other companies to do the same. So my advice in terms of this, I still would say, long lists, be aware of them, be aware of look at the research behind each and every product. There are entities such as BDS internationally, BDS in South Africa, who produce certain lists with appended information to be able to give us an indication whether certain products should be boycotted or not. But look at what's feasible, look at what is long term, and also the information that's provided about a certain product. For example, G4S at one point was a very firm target of boycott, but because they have scaled down the involvement, they are no longer being targeted. So look at the information, that how relevant or how new is the information regarding a particular product. And I think from what I've seen broadly in South Africa, people have mentioned products like ZZ2 tomatoes, kiwi and clover amongst the key targets from a shorter targeted list, and there are obviously longer strategic lists to be aware of, and one can act on that as and when it is practical.
Shukran. A final question is with regards to the aid. Humanitarian organizations are raising aid for Gaza itself, and many are curious how sure can we be that the money that we are donating will be getting past the borders, or it will be used to buy aid that will aid merchandise that will actually pass the Rafah border between Egypt and Palestine and enter into Gaza to provide much needed relief for the people.
I think here also I think we've got an excessive amount of these questions in recent times. Like I said, questions about conspiracies and so forth have been so prominent in this particular episode. I think here we've got aid groups that have a long track record, have been working in the Gaza Strip. And at this particular moment in time, we should not be asking an excessive amount of questions, particularly if these are trusted groups and they've been working in the field. If they put out direct appeals, we should go with that, understanding two things. Number one, perhaps at this moment, monetary assistance is not going into the Gaza Strip or not going in large amounts. Or even if monetary assistance does go into the Gaza Strip, it's not going to have much of an impact because the scale of the destruction and the restrictions of movement are so great that having all the money in the world in one's pocket is not able to purchase one anything. But there have been aid groups from the prominent groups in South Africa, for instance, that have done projects in this period of war in the Gaza Strip using available supplies in the Gaza Strip. So this is where we need to appreciate long-term relationships are coming into play, where a person would donate to an organization, the organization would notify local partners on the ground, release goods that are being kept in a warehouse or in a supermarket. And even if we cannot pay you now, we will settle the account later. But we've got this amount of money, release this amount of goods. And in that way, projects have been ongoing in the Gaza Strip from existing food supplies, existing humanitarian supplies, to be able to fulfill the humanitarian needs. That is obviously going to run out at some point, and that means that way of doing aid is not going to work anymore. But as we can see then, the money is not going to waste. The money is going to be paid, going to settle, but the work is being done on the ground in the Gaza Strip, number one. Number two is the crisis is so great, and we do not know when the borders would open. The amount of aid that is going in now is a drop in the ocean, and it's almost tokenism. But when the borders open, inshallah, and they open soon, assuming that it only opens for a short window, the organizations would have had to already purchase supplies, transport them to the region, and be ready to rush them into the Gaza Strip, ready with their distribution efforts. All of this takes money, and therefore we cannot just wait for something to open and then hold back. What if, and I'll say this from a spiritual point of view, when we have the opportunity to fulfill our amana, and we don't know what the future holds, we should do it now. And inshallah, the reward and the effect of that will be felt. It is not our responsibility then to be able to be involved in the actual distribution efforts. So having said that, contribute in the moment to credible organizations who've been working on the ground for a long time, and take a cue from them and leave it in their hands. But at the same time, be aware, as I mentioned earlier, stagger the aid out over a period of time, because the needs are immense. 50% of Gaza destroyed, so many amputees, so much reconstruction that needs to occur. This is definitely a long-term cause. So assist in the moment, but also ensure that we plan ourselves financially in a way that we can assist on an ongoing basis.
Shukran jazilan for that. We are reaching approximately 1.5 hours into this session. And as much as we would love to continue to have the discussion, it is getting quite late in South Africa and in many other parts of the world. So we hope that in the future, perhaps, inshallah, we can pick up this discussion. But in the meantime, we'd like to express our thanks for you coming onto the platform tonight, Muslims Connected, sharing your knowledge and expertise and experience with us, providing us with very valuable insights during this very difficult moment in the Ummah's history. We pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accepts all of your efforts for the sake of Palestine and for the liberation of Masjid al-Aqsa al-Mubarak. And we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grants our brothers in Palestine and in many other parts of the world a sure deliverance sooner rather than later. Ameen. Ladies and gentlemen, would love to thank you for your attendance tonight, your patience and your attention, and engaging us so thoroughly with your questions and comments. On behalf of Muslims Connected, would like to thank you once again. Shukran jazilan, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.